I just thought it would be nice to have a conversation for Bulawayo-based writers, very much like the one that we had like at the beginning of the year, and not everyone was there. But just talking about writing, about why we write from here, why we write about, what what we're reading, and Drew had some general ideas about how to guide us through that. So I think it's really that simple. I mean, it's all about reading Africa. We write from the continent, so I think we do both the reading and the writing from Africa, and I just really be able to capture us as a community, and then share that with them, just like why we do what we do from where we do it.
Okay, now that sounds quite straightforward. I was just going to ask you all what you're writing at the moment, what you have written. We haven't got a lot of time to go into lots of detail, but maybe highlights of what you've just finished writing and what you're writing at the moment, if you are, and then also what you are reading, or else what you would recommend as a good read, because I think readers are always looking for good recommendations, and for Africa Reading Week, it's all about the importance of reading, I guess, and the significance of that. So I'm guessing that quite a few readers would find it interesting to know what some of the writers that they know are reading. So maybe we can start off with you, Siphiwe. What have you just finished writing, and what are you writing at the moment? And then if you could, tell us also what you're reading at the moment.
So I just finished writing what the publishers have decided to call the City of Kings trilogy, which is my first 3 novels. And I'm working on polishing the 4th novel sometime, hopefully starting in December, which is also set in Bulawayo, but a very different kind of novel, I hope. And I'm currently reading, I can't see myself, so I hope you can see the book I'm holding up, which is by Barbara Masekela, and it's called Polly Polly. And it's a nonfiction book about basically growing up during apartheid, but also sort of like the diasporic nature of South African identities and movement and travel, which are things that I'm also very interested in, both creatively and intellectually. I'm finding it a very great nonfiction read. So that's me.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks for starting us off, Siphiwe. I'm sure we'll come back to what you've raised after everyone's told us what they're writing and what they're reading. Violette, can we ask you next what you're writing, or what you've just finished writing, and what you're reading?
Thank you, Drew. I'm pretty excited to be doing the very final touches on a second novel, which I didn't think there would be a first. So the fact that there's a second is quite exciting for me, also because it came a lot more homogeneously on the heels of Mulberry Dreams, my debut novel. And it just kind of developed and bubbled inside me. And I finished it probably June this year. And I've just been doing some finishing touches to it, and very much hope to launch it under Pigeon Press again in March 2023. So that one will be called Magic and Masala, and it incorporates the lives of some of the characters from Mulberry Dreams, but takes the story right back to the early 1900s, to the Muslim matriarch of the family from, she's a Cape Malay lady, and just in my mind, a wonderful woman who I've fallen madly in love with. And so her story links to the characters from the modern day Mulberry Dreams. So it goes way back and also goes a little bit into the future of Mulberry Dreams. So I'm excited about that. What I'm reading at the moment is reading Lolita in Tehran. And it's a book that I have come back to a few times and often can't get through it because it's such a difficult read, and more so now with everything that's happening in Iran. But being of Iranian descent, it resonates very strongly with me. And it's a wonderful story about a group of women who meet in secret to study literature. And it dissects the literature that they're reading as well as their lives in Iran. And it's interesting because it's before the revolution and then just after the revolution. So at a time when people thought that Iran was going to be this wonderful new place, they'd overthrown the Shah, and now here was a new democracy, but slowly reality is starting to set in that this isn't what we expected. And when you think this is 30, 40 years ago and we're still doing the same old thing, it's quite disheartening, but a great read.
Thanks, Violette. It sounds like it is. And thanks also to Siphiwe for recommending the Polly Polly, because both of those, they're on my reading list, Christmas reading list, for sure. Can we turn to Scotty next? Scotty, could you tell us what you're busy writing at the moment, if you are, or what you've recently finished writing, and also what you're reading?
Okay, I have just finished a little while ago, but have been madly editing the 4th in the Sibanda series. So this one's called Sibanda and the Night Adder. And it's the same trio of fun friends, you know, D.I. Sibanda, Jabulani Sibanda, Sergeant Ngube, Miss Daisy the Land Rover, and they're all caught up in the bush in the area around, in the area called Gubu, which is in fact based on Dete, the Wangi National Park. So, and this is based on diamonds. So, plus there is a historical element running through the novel. We're looking for Lobengula's diamonds at the same time. There's a link to Lobengula and his diamonds. So Sibanda's under pressure as usual. He's on the run because they think he's stolen the diamonds, but there's also an element of history, of Zimbabwe history in there, which I had a great deal of fun writing, or enjoyment, should I say, writing. I loved that. So that's going to be out, I think, in around February. The cover's done. It's coming out by the others are all but with Constable & Co. in the UK. But this one is with Carnelian Hearts in the UK, which is a boutique Zimbabwean publisher. So I'm very happy to have it published. I've also self-published a book, which I'll just show you. I've got it here somewhere. So I've just done this one called Girl in a Storm, which is a fantasy novel. And I never thought in my life I'd write a fantasy novel, but it's amazing where things and prompts and ideas take you. And the greatest thing about doing it is that no one can say to you that bird's feather is wrong, or that creature's, it doesn't behave like that, because believe me, people will pick you up on those sort of things. I can make it up, so no, but it doesn't matter. So I had a load of fun with that, and it's a YA, so that's been a lot of fun. I have 2 novels with my agent in the UK on submission. They're not based in Africa, they're based in England. They're a female detective, and they're doing the rounds, and we have our fingers crossed that somebody will pick them up, which would be lovely, because I think they're great. And what am I currently writing? Well, I've had a bit of a hiatus as I've been editing other things, but I'm currently writing an Australian novel. I thought, I'm in Australia, why not write an Australian novel? So I have an adventure escape novel on the go. Why not? So that's fun.
Well, my goodness, you seem to be doing a lot of writing, Scotty. That's great to hear.
And I was going to say, not an awful lot of reading, but I have just recently read Sunyati's An Angel's Demise, which I highly recommend. It's obviously it's based on Zimbabwe history. It's based on recent Zimbabwe history, the taking of the land and the farms and the complications that have arisen from it. So a good read and well worth looking at. And whilst but I left that back in Zimbabwe and I'm now here for about the week in Australia. So I've just picked up this one again, which is Mornings in Jenin. And I don't know if any of you have read it, by Susan Abulwa. It's an extraordinary novel. It was a revelation for me. It was life-changing for me. I never understood fully the conflict between Israel and Palestine until I read this book. And it was a revelation. So I highly recommend it. It's not new, but I've just been reading it again. So an excellent read. So that's me.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Scotty, for those recommendations. Sounds like, and Sunyati, of course, is a Bulawayo local. So
yes,
it's great that you've picked up on her new book. Look forward to reading that, and some excellent recommendations. Thanks. Can we turn to John? John, next. What have you been? John's written a lot in the past, and I think most of us have followed his numerous publications of novels and poetry anthologies. But maybe you can tell us about your sort of most recent writings, John, and what you're writing at the moment or about to write, and also what you're reading or what you can recommend.
Oh, I haven't been writing very much recently. I did write my childhood memoirs, which I hope Pigeon Press will be bringing out later this year. It's their sketches of my childhood, going from from early years to 1980 to independence. But I wrote those quite some time ago. That's not new writing. And I'm also preparing my collected poems, which I've been working on for some time now. There are about close on 400 poems, which I'm trying to put into a collection, a kind of swan song, I think. Because I think I'm kind of running out of writing now. I'm more interested in feeding my pets.
We want you to write forever.
Well, anyway, so there hasn't been much writing. There's been a lot of sort of other kinds of writing, like preparing my A-level syllabus and so on for teaching. That kind of writing going on, which always school teachers always have to have, and kind of like interferes with our creative writing. So that's my writing, not much at the moment. But reading, I've gone back to reread one of my favorite authors, George Eliot. I reread Daniel Deronda, and now I'm busy rereading Middlemarch and just enjoying them more than ever. But what's been really exciting for me this year is the two manuscripts that I've read. First of all, Violette's manuscript, and then more recently, Fatima Kara's manuscript, which is called, her novel is called The Train House in Lobongula Street. And what's fascinating is the coincidence that they both focus on the Muslim community of Bulawayo, and I've just been enthralled by both of them. They've kind of, it's just amazing to me that they've come together in my sort of consciousness, and opened up that area of Bulawayo, which, you know, hasn't really been studied and written about enough, at least not that I know of. So yeah, I've been thoroughly engrossed by both those manuscripts, which will be coming out next year.
Thank you, John, so much for going through them as well.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, John, you're perfectly entitled to a pause in your lengthy sort of writing career, but it seems nevertheless you've got things in the pipeline which we look forward to. The childhood sketches are amazing. I think quite a few of us read them in various forms of the book. And thanks for the recommendations of forthcoming perspectives, new perspectives, or more perspectives from Bulawayo, including from the Muslim community. It's so encouraging that so much is coming out of Bulawayo, and it's increasingly diverse and interesting. Brilliant, thank you, John. Can I turn to Bryony next? Bryony, what are you writing at the moment, or what have you just finished writing, and what are you reading, or any recommendations for reading?
Yes, hi everybody. Sorry if my voice is a bit croaky. I've got this flu that's going around. So for about the 50th time, I've worked on my novel, which is called All Come to Dust, and that is, I'd say, finished, and it's with my publishers now. It's a book. It's set in the late 1930s in Bulawayo, and it's a story told from the perspective of a house servant who comes to realize that he witnessed a murder within the house that he worked in. Siphiwe, I know that you've read this manuscript, and it's changed. It has actually changed since then. I don't think I could help it. I had to make it a murder. So hopefully that will be off my hands soon. I'm also editing a book of short stories. It's collected short stories with a publisher called Parthian in the UK. So some of the stories have appeared in other collections, like the short writings from Bulawayo collection. But it's also got some different stories that haven't been published. And that anthology is going to be called Whatever Happened to Rick Astley. And that's the title of one of the stories in the collection. And I must tell you that I had to fight for that title because I was told that it wasn't an African title. So yeah, I really had to fight for that. Obviously nobody in Africa has heard of Rick Astley. So in terms of new stuff, I have done a bit of writing, but not very much. But I've started another crime novel, which is about a woman who comes back to Bulawayo because her mother is attacked one night. Her mother has decided, she's elderly, she's decided she's going to stay on in this big house, and in order to survive in Zimbabwe, she's had to take in a couple of tenants, and she's knocked on the head one night, and so the daughter, who's living in the UK, says, right, she's had enough, she's going to come back and take her mother back to the UK. But when she comes back, her mother's obviously in hospital, and while she's recovering in hospital, she starts to realize that there's something strange going on at this property, and that her mother being attacked was not just a random act of violence. Don't ask me when that will be finished. Don't ask me that when that will be out, because knowing me is going to be about 7 years. In terms of reading stuff, I know I agree totally with what John says. You know, as a school teacher, you read set books, you constantly writing notes for your classes, and you know, I mean, I keep pushing how important reading is, but I actually read the least in my family. Everybody reads far more than I do. However, I got this book in August, and I've actually read the first chapter. It's called A Carrion Death, and it's by somebody called Michael Stanley. But Michael Stanley is actually two people, and that's their writing name. It's Michael Sears, and I forget the other guy's name. I think it's Stanley something else. And yeah, it's also an African crime novel. They've actually got a new book out called Facets of Death. It's set in Botswana. There's detective who solves crimes in Botswana. It's not, however, it's not like that other guy with his detective agency stuff. It's very different to that. But I thought, okay, I would start with the first novel rather than start with the latest one. So this one was actually published in about 2009, I think. So I thought I'd start with that. So I'll probably be finished it by next Christmas. Not this Christmas, though.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thanks, Bryony. That sounds wonderful. I think many can sympathize with the workload of teachers, maybe particularly English teachers, marking, etc., and reading the set books that they're teaching their students, and not having as much time as they would like to read other books as well. However, you've still come up with something interesting for us, and thanks for the overview of what you've been writing. I can see Sue Hubert, is your video is working again, so that's great. Sue, can we ask you what you have been writing? Is it what you've been writing recently, or what you've maybe a bit of a background to what you have written, and then also what you're reading and what you would recommend?
Okay, so these two books that I've written in the Sun Rising collection, this one I published I think in 2020, and then this one I published in 2021. They're doing very well on Amazon. I've sold over 8,000 copies now, hundreds of ratings. So I'm very pleased that they are obviously putting Bulawayo onto the map. So it's inspired me to get the next one done. The first one, which I actually wrote probably about 8 or 10 years ago, but then I rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it, Sun Rising. And then I started The Sun is Bright, which is just after the second generation of the family coming back to Bulawayo and readjusting to life in Bulawayo after the Second World War. And I based that story on an old friend of mine who I was very friendly with. She was an old school teacher here. Her name was Margaret Montgomery. And I used to see a lot of her, and she used to tell me about her life back then. And so I used a lot of what she told me to write that novel. And I also used my grandfather fought in Egypt during the war, and he was captured and sent to Italy, and he spent a long time in an Italian prisoner of war camp, and then he escaped and basically was in occupied Italy for a long time, having to keep away from the Germans and the Italians. The Italian resistance looked after him for a long time until he managed to escape. Experiences there. So I used his experiences in my novel as well.
Well, let's continue, and hopefully Sue will join us when she can. thanks very much to everyone for sharing what they're writing and what they're reading. There's a few kind of points of commonality amongst you, well, many of you. And one thing I've noticed is that we have quite a few writers who are also teachers, or who have been involved in education before or in some form. And I was wondering about that, because it is Africa Reading Week. What are some of your opinions about how best to encourage a reading amongst your students? Maybe what you can talk about your sort of experiences, and let's start off with Scotty, since you're here. Have you any ideas for encouraging reading, perhaps with young readers, or indeed with everyone? It seems like it's something worthy of promoting.
I'm unaware of many books that are African based, that appeal to young readers. We seem to write adult novels, or novels focused on the adult population. All of us here have written novels for grown-ups, as it were. There doesn't seem to be a whole load of books for, and there are a lot of children's very little books, you know, coloring it, picture books for children and so on. But that middle range age, I'm unaware, and perhaps it's because I don't have anybody in that age group, of there being a large canon of work in that. And I think perhaps that's something we should all look at. Maybe we should all be writing something for that age group. You know, I know there's a publisher in Namibia who's pestering me. Don't know when I'm going to have time to write a crime novel for kids, you know, and African kids of that age group. Okay. And I'm sure that I don't know of any. The others might know of books, but I don't.
Interesting.
So to begin with,
the point being is that perhaps there aren't books targeting that particular age group, and there could be a bit of a gap over there, and perhaps young readers in Africa would be more drawn to those sorts of books. Interesting. Thanks for that, Scotty. Siphiwe, can I bring you in, and do you have any views as an educator yourself, because you've been involved as well in quite a lot of teaching, I think, of literature and other subjects, and any ideas about, you know, the value of reading and how it can be encouraged in Africa, in Zimbabwe maybe particularly?
So yeah, I mean, I think like Panelist Press for sure has an amazing collection of YA novels set on the continent that I think, you know, if people would like kids to actually see their surroundings in a novel and read it that way, or engage with the environment that way, I think there definitely are novels. And I think I know some even South African publishers are really trying to get a lot of children's and YA novels published. So I think there's that. I also think, for me anyway, the biggest thing is representation. And so it almost doesn't matter as long as there's enough representation. So if you see yourself in a story, I think, you know, you will read that story. Which is why I like what we were saying before about, you know, like people writing about the Muslim community, which where we come from is something that hardly ever happens. So now a child who knows that that book is out there will definitely probably read that book, because it will be representing a part of their history and a part of their life, regardless of the age group that that book was intended for. I know I wrote The Theory of Flight, which is now currently a set work, and I would not have thought that, you know, it was a YA novel in any sense, but, you know, students are reading it and finding a lot to connect with. And I think that's the important thing. I mean, as long as we're being diverse and representative and inclusive, I think that's what we should be, you know, the genre, the age group, all of that is also important. But I think the most important is just have a diversity, not only of genre, but also of subject matter, of the people in the novels. All of that needs to be things that we push forward. And I think, you know, when you teach, for instance, a student in Zimbabwe nervous conditions, it's a very different kind of teaching, right? Because, you know, for some of them, they actually know people like Lucia and Babamkuru and all of that. It becomes a different kind of reading. So I think it's important to have that personal connection. And I think it's great that African novels at this moment in time are just like growing exponentially. And a lot of people are writing from different vantage points. I mean, there was a time there that the African novel was a very thinly defined thing, you know, and I think we've moved away from that, which is very good. So as people are reading Africa this coming week, I think that's one of the things that everyone in the world should know, is that African literature is a very diverse thing, and people can find their own stories in it, regardless of where they are. I mean, you know, a lot of things have happened on this continent, and so I don't think we should feel like you're reading otherness or something different. I think everyone can engage on a different level. But yeah, definitely important to get students to read. Thankfully, I haven't had to do that for 4 years. So yeah, but yeah.
Fantastic. That's it seems yeah, you're sort of echoing that the idea that it's important to it makes a difference for readers to sort of see themselves somewhere in the books that they read, and African literature is indeed, or it can be, a very diverse very diverse thing. Can I ask John next? What are your views on reading, encouraging reading in Africa and Zimbabwe? Your experience of this, and any thoughts?
Yeah, I always encourage my students to read as much as possible, but the evidence that's coming through is that children are getting less and less capable of reading. We see this at school with our entrance exams, for instance, where they do quite well on the writing exercises, but come short on the comprehension exercises. And I guess that's to some extent due to the digital age that we're living in, you know, that they're getting used, like their parents, just to read little news bites, and anything that's longer than 3 lines terrifies them. But I know I get lots and lots of young people in this country sending me their poems to read and ask me when they can get published and can I publish for them and so on. And there's 2 categories. I can tell you immediately the budding writers who are readers and the budding writers who don't read anything. It's so evident in the work that they send me. And so I say to them, read, you know, read. And I give them a list of African writers that they, you know, that I recommend that they read. But I don't know. It's I think it's absolutely vital for a writer, somebody who wants to be a writer, to read and read and read, especially in their genre, you know.
Yeah.
So
thanks for that.
It's disappointing. There doesn't seem to be much emphasis on it. I don't think there are too many bookshelves in the homes. I don't know how many moms and dads read to their children, you know, when they're very young. That's so important. That's where the reading habit starts, you know, very early on. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think it's vitally important.
So it's a wider challenge there. It seems that it's mums and dads, and it should be involved. And it's thanks for making that point about poetry, because I think you're our main sort of poetry representative over here, and so many Zimbabweans, I agree with you, are writing poetry and wanting to write poetry, and that's great. But like as you said, the poetry improves dramatically if there's some kind of a fair amount of reading that goes alongside it. And I know you've been involved in poetry workshops, trying to encourage that.
Not just
So
reading, sorry, Drew,
carry on.
but listening as well. Listening, you know, that's also very important. After all, the whole tradition of poetry began in the oral, in the oral tradition. So young people must listen. They must listen to their elders. They must listen to, you know, their relatives and so on, and to the people around them. That people don't listen much anymore, except to their sort of peer group. They're very, you know, their social group online and so on.
Yeah.
So it's also listening is as important as reading.
Yeah. That's a good point, because of course poetry is so much connected, isn't it, with listening and sound.
Yes.
And there's a very rich oral literature in Africa that we often neglect.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Turning to Bryony. Bryony, any views on the subject of encouraging reading from your perspective?
Yeah, you know, over the years, I've had so many parents say to me, you know, these parent-teacher meetings, they said, how can we get our children to improve their English? And I always feel they want to be told they've got to go for extra lessons, or they've got to go for a test to see if they've got something wrong with them or whatever, you know. And I always say, how much do they read? And chances are it'll be they don't read. And then you get the parents who go, oh, I don't know why they don't read. And you say, well, do you read? And they say, no. Quite surprised, you know, that they have to be readers. And I think this is what John's saying. There's no role model. There's nobody reading in the home. So where do children get that idea that they must read? I think the most important thing you can do for your children is to read to them. And that can actually start, I mean, I'm not being crazy here, but that can actually start before a child is born. I know that sounds a bit extreme, but you can actually read to a child in the womb. You can read to a newborn baby. I think people wait too long to start reading stories. They feel a bit odd, you know, a bit strange. Why are they reading this? And yet they would perfectly well sing to a child to get them to sleep, but they won't tell them a story. Then in terms of the presents we give children, we don't give books. So children don't learn to value them. Books are often seen as expensive because I'm paying this amount of money and, you know, I've read it. So what do I do with it afterwards? Whereas if I put a whole lot more money into a cell phone or an iPad, I'm going to get much more use out of it. So I think there's lots of things like that. Also, we just don't have bookshops, and our bookshops tend to be stationery shops, or they tend to sell set books. But the idea of reading for pleasure is actually quite a foreign one. And then we also have the added problem of the way that Africa is often presented in stories. So you know, I've done this exercise with so many of my classes over the years, where they've written a story and it's set in New York, and there's a big car chase and criminals and all sorts of, you know, amazing things happen. And I said to them, right, why didn't you set that story in Bulawayo? Or why didn't you set it in Harare? And they always go, you know, well, these things, they don't happen here. I said, yeah, they do happen. They actually do happen. And they can happen anywhere in the world. But then there's this idea that, oh, if I'm going to write about Africa, it's got to be about famine. It's got to be about abuse. It's got to be about illness and death and whatever. And that's part of the problem. So we also have a Western publishing, these Western publishing houses who only want that kind of story. So if you do write a different kind of story, they're not willing to publish it because their audience, which is mainly Western, also have this idea of Africa. So I think if we started to change that, if we started to change the way that Africa is portrayed in novels, then we might see more young people reading African novels. But they just want to read, sometimes they just want to read a romance. You know, they just want to read something straightforward, not literary. They don't want things fall apart. You know, they don't want that kind of novel. They just want something which is about two people who fall in love and what happens to them, you know, but that's not, doesn't seem to be available for them.
Thanks for that, Bryony. It seems like, yeah, that's echoing a point that all of you seem to be making in a way, which is about not only diversifying the representation of characters and themes in African writing, you know, from the continent, from Zimbabwe particularly, I suppose, but diversifying maybe the expectations as well, as to what, you know, what one can read in an African novel, and it seems that is happening, but maybe more gradually than perhaps many people would like. Thank you for that. Violette, any views from yourself?
Sure, we probably don't have a lot of time. I wanted to first of all say that I agree with what everyone says, but I do think that this issue of encouraging people to read, and especially children, is a global one. And as John said, it's so much to do with the fact that everything's gone digital and everything's become very, very fast, and to sit and read a whole book, it just isn't what people are doing now, be they adult or children. And even if we had, I don't necessarily think that it's a shortage of available reading material. I think it's engendering that interest in reading. And I think perhaps one of the ways we can do that is making reading more interactive, having reading activities, as well as just saying to kids, sit down and read this book, but turning it into plays, turning it into reading mornings. We have a shop that sells books, and we find that we have a lot of people coming in saying, you know, they want their kids to read more, and their kids aren't reading more. And then we also say to them, well, you know, have you tried perhaps letting them act out the stories and bring them to life? What we do at the shop is we do reading mornings where an author, we love to get the author who's written the book come and read to kids. And then afterwards, they'll put together a little play based on the story. And we have just such a great turnout for those events, because parents and children love to hear the story, and it's just bringing it to life. So perhaps we just need, not that we're trying now to turn reading into the same, you know, digital escape, but just finding a way to intersect the reading world with the world that they're used to, which perhaps is more current and more visual as well. So perhaps we all understand the problem, and that's that people aren't reading enough, but we need to come at it with a solution, how to bring reading to life for all ages, but particularly for young people whose attention spans are sadly getting less and less.
Interesting. Thanks, Violette, for that. Yeah. So the idea of the reading aloud and some initiatives to, you know, storytelling, and that's very. Those points are interesting, and I think there's lots to explore in that respect of encouraging reading. But maybe, you know, audiobooks as well are a thing, and there are different ways that I guess we can go about encouraging engaging with literature and reading material. So thanks for that. I think sadly we've lost connection with Sue, who didn't have a very good connection, but we did hear a bit from her. Sue's not with us anymore, but so I wanted to. We've got a few minutes left. I'll try and wrap up within an hour, because I know people have got sort of limits on their time. But another theme that I wanted to pick up amongst you is well, at least a couple of you, is crime writing. Crime writing in Africa seems to be having a renaissance, or a sort of there's a boom period for going on in terms of crime fiction. It's very popular. It's popular globally, I guess, but it's quite striking how well crime fiction is doing in an African context. In South Africa and now in Zimbabwe, we've got a number of people writing crime. And so I wondered, if you had some thoughts on that. What are the reasons? Why do people like reading crime fiction, particularly in Africa? Scotty, maybe if you've got a few words to say on that, and Bryony, I know you've also got some thoughts on that. Over to you, Scotty, first.
Yes, well, I think the first thing to say is that you're never going to get Inspector Morse in the middle of the bush, so it's different. My books obviously are based in the bush, with a detective who is very knowledgeable about the bush, and so it enables me to weave in some interesting facts about what's happening: elephants, rhinos, stuff we don't necessarily know. And I think it's like a safari in a book, and I think people have latched onto it because it is different. I mean, it is not an English detective novel, where they're wearing, or an American where they're wearing the Homburg and the Mac, and they're smoking and they've got alcohol problems. The problems in Africa are vastly different, and the crimes are very different, So my first book, for instance, was based on Muti murders, which is, as you know, body parts are perceived as being curative, magical, and in many ways, well, that just doesn't happen in the rest of the world. My second novel, The Death's Head Moth, was based on poaching, which we all know is a huge issue. And we have to look at both sides, and I hope I did look at both sides of the poaching story. The third one, no, it wasn't really. It could have been anything. It could have been anywhere, but it was set on the train going from Bulawayo to Victoria Falls, which is an extraordinary journey, as anybody will tell you. So I think that there are differences, and the characters are different. They don't have the resources. It's not like a police procedural where they go into the computer and there's fingerprints and this and that. My detective has to work on instinct. So he's got the slightly old-fashioned way of going about things. And I think that still gets people in, with the different environment particularly. So I'm hoping this fourth one will do the same. It's based on diamonds. It's based on conflict diamonds. And it's based on Zimbabwean diamonds, which seem to have disappeared down a drain hole.
Yes.
So, those sort of things don't happen necessarily in the rest of the world.
No,
so they're
so
unique.
It's kind of coming at crime fiction from a unique perspective, or an African, raising some sort of African themes over there. Bryony, would you like to come in on that question about crime and the resurgence, the popularity, or what's attractive to readers in Africa about that?
Look, I think crime has a huge following anyway. I think, so many people around the world are interested in crime. And actually, it's not just African crime. You now get Swedish crime, Italian crime. I think that I was reading about a detective in Thailand as well. So I think a lot of people now, a lot of writers are inventing their own detectives. No longer is it Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot who are going to solve all the problems. So I think number one, it's general interest. Number two, I mean, for me, it's a way of exploring our society, which I think is totally corrupt, and actually I think it's totally rotten. I think perhaps I think perhaps my novel, or I'd like to think it wasn't quite just a straightforward who killed this person and why did they kill them, but it was more also an exploration of who we are as Zimbabweans, and how we've changed over the last 40 years, but also how we've stayed the same. And all those sort of strange little quirks, that make us, who we are, that sort of set us apart from the rest of Africa. Yeah, I think to me it's a way of exploring society. So you can have a murder story, but also it can raise so many other issues as well.
Thanks, Bryony. Yeah, that's it's good to get your that perspective from both of you on crime writing. Got a couple more questions. I'll try and wrap up in the next few minutes. But I was also interested. John and Siphiwe, maybe I can direct this question at you. It seems in your books there are often literary allusions, not only yours, but it seems I'm sort of singling you out because you seem to have a lot of them. For example, to Shakespeare, to various other sort of maybe Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and these sort of readings, I suppose, this wider kind of reading finds itself in the work that you're involved in, and your novels or your short stories, or and I wondered if you could comment, on the value of that. I guess because it relates to you have to have read quite a lot in order to kind of incorporate those literary allusions in your novels. But maybe you can say something about how that helps you. Your reading, your extra reading. How does that help with how does it inform your writing and the whole process? Siphiwe, can I start with you?
So I think, first of all, part of it is just having maybe spent too many years reading as a student, and then someone who teaches novels and books and poetry and stuff. But I think the important thing for me anyway is that I'm very much aware that I'm part of an ongoing conversation, right? That I'm part of a literary tradition that extends way back beyond me, both orally and in terms of written works. So I think when I write, I feel like I am always in conversation with what's come before in some way. And I've definitely been influenced in some ways by what I've read. When I think about, for instance, just here, the works of Yvonne Vera, for instance, and how she wrote about Bulawayo. There's no way I can particularly write about Bulawayo maybe in the 1950s without having some kind of allusion or intertextuality, because I am in some ways responding to what I read or the images that were created when I read certain passages in her work. So for me, it's just a way of loving words, but also loving the tradition you're part of or you hope to be a part of, and just being in conversation with people who came before and hopefully people who come after you. So for me, it's really that simple.
Thanks, Siphiwe. Yeah. John, any comments?
I'm not sure. I know I do that a lot. I know my poems especially are just full of allusions to other writers. And I don't do it deliberately. I don't sort of consciously do it. It's as if what I've read since I was a little boy is somehow hovering there, and it kind of just blends with my own sort of images and ideas. I think also from a philosophical point of view, I've learned what's given me some kind of idea about what life means and that sort of thing has come from more from the literature that I've studied and read than from books on philosophy or books on science and so on. I just see the patterns. I see the paradoxical idea of killing to live. It goes right back to everything I've ever read, going right back to the ancient Greeks, going back to Heraclitus, and I see it being repeated. And then I read about I read Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, and I just see that the same thing kind of there. The whole Buddhist idea of the yin and the yang, you know, the necessity of opposites, that you need light to cast a shadow. I don't, yeah, and then that helps me to read somebody like Nietzsche and understand that he's kind of on the same kind of wavelength. And then you move into this world that Wittgenstein opened up for me, where words can't be fixed. They change all the time, depending on the context. And so as Hamlet, as Polonius said to Hamlet, these are but, no, sorry, as Horatio said to Hamlet, these are but wild and whirling words, my lord. And that's, my writing's like that, and that's why I use conventional forms to trap those wild and whirling thoughts in, you know, straitjackets like sonnets and villanelles and even sestinas, you know, and ballads and so on. So that I kind of, it's like a Pandora's box that's been closed, and I'm inside a Pandora's box where hope and despair are at war with each other all the time. And when that Pandora's box opens, which it does, like if you read any great literature, the form, the entrapment of the act of writing is something somehow releases it, and you have these experiences, and they just, you know, it's like reading. I guess I've been influenced by writers like James Joyce and T.S. Eliot, you know, who are so intertextuality, whatever the word is. They've influenced me. Sorry, I'm talking nonsense. But
well, not really, no. There's lots of intertextuality going back to James Joyce and all of those, right? It's wonderful. Thank you both of you, Siphiwe and John, for that. Just a wonderful promotion, really, of wider reading and the importance of wider reading, because, you know, as you've just articulated it, it can inform your writing in a very rich way, and your engagement with the world. And so that's a great note to finish with. I was going to also ask, so thanks, John and Siphiwe. I was going to also ask Violette and Sue to talk about another theme that I picked up on, which is sort of romantic intrigues and the appeal that they have to readers. Unfortunately, Sue's got kind of disconnected, but perhaps I can give the last word to Violette on the enduring appeal of romance or romantic kind of intrigues in books and novels.
Thanks, Drew. I hate coming after John. That was amazing what he was saying. So I think for me, it's less about romance and it's more about love, and it's love in all its forms. And for me, the experiences of my life which have most stayed with me are expressions of love, and what I seek in others is the same thing. So my stories tend to be, there is often a romantic point in the stories, which are often a point of conflict, but it's more about how people respond to love, how they search for love, how they behave when they have it, and how they behave when they're bereft of it. And although I take in my two books, Mulberry Dreams and now Magic in Masala, a particular family and how theirs may not have been a traditional love, it's more about how society reacted and how it was a sort of observation on society and its lack of acceptance of love, romantic and otherwise. And so I suppose for me, I've thought of them as a way of illustrating the human condition, really, because we are so much made of love. And it's at the point where that love is either challenged or reciprocated that maybe our strongest reactions come out. And although, again, it's about two quite distinct relationships in two quite distinct racial situations, I would like to think that it appeals to us because it's human, and that whether it happened in Bulawayo or in Cape Town or anywhere in the world, people can relate to that need for love, because that is really what we are. We are, we are born of love often, and often our first instinct is love, our mother's love. I know that my kids will always say that I'm very much like a picnics and rainbows type of person, but in my stories, everyone dies. But I think that, we've got those extremes of emotions which make us who we are. And at the center of all of them is often love, rather than strictly romance.
Thank you for that. Yes, so timeless themes again, sort of love and life and death, and romance is a particular genre, but as you've said, it's far more nuanced than that, and the way that you've started to deal with it is intriguing, and hopefully this interest in these themes will encourage readers to read more. Final word I should give to Siphiwe, who brilliantly came up with this whole idea to contribute to Africa Reading Week. Siphiwe, any final comments? Over to you, and thank you to everyone who's participated. This has been a great conversation for me. I always love talking about literature, particularly about Zimbabwean literature, and with all of you having, some kind of Bulawayo connection, it's been a special occasion for me. So thank you, and over to Siphiwe for any final word.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. Thank you, everyone, for agreeing to be part of it. I think for me, what's always important is for people to understand and to realize just what it is that we're doing on this continent with words. I think for the most part, I think someone mentioned Chinua Achebe, and people tend to think, African fiction or African literature is still there. But I think from what we heard in this conversation, there's different genres that people are writing in, some very literary, some very popular. There's different ways people are engaging with words. That topic or that heading or whatever, African literature is a very diverse and varied thing. And so when people are, going into this week thinking about, what am I going to read? And is it going to be like, a story that I won't be able to engage with? I'm hoping that this very conversation has shown people that it is actually, African literature is not very different from many other kinds of literatures. It's just maybe set in a different place in the world and may have certain things that it deals with. But as Violette just said, love is at the heart of a lot of things, and maybe the way we solve crime looks different, but the reasons why the crime took place is probably, the same for anywhere in the world. So I'm hoping that people will understand that we are doing something that's, yes, different, but also very, very much the same with what happens all over the world. And this is just a very small city in a very small country, and this is already how diverse and wonderful the writing is just from this one place. So you can imagine this multiplied by however many hundreds across the continent, and you have African literature. So thank you all for taking part and agreeing to be here, and I hope the conversation was what you wanted it to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us.
I wanted to say thank you all for taking part. What a wonderful conversation. It's been so nice for me to be able to get to know all of you guys through the conversation. I've got so many books to add to my pile of books that I need to read. So thanks for the recommendations. And thanks for making time and taking part in Reading Africa Week. Like Siphiwe said, I think this is just so representative of just how diverse and wonderful African literature can be and how much is there to explore.